welcome to our show, Web of Light, where I'm being a little different today because I'm starting out this show. It's usually Dr. Kevin that opens it up for me. So here I am, Angie Donjou with Dr. Kevin.
Hello and welcome to Web of Light. Today we're doing a very special show. We're going to, as always, do our words of wisdom, which Angie will be introducing in a moment. And then we're going to have as our guest the world.
Yeah.
And what's going on in the world today. And we're going to be giving you a segment that I used to do all the time on my radio show, which is called Through the Spiritual Lens, where you take things going on in the world and you put them through a spiritual lens. And that's the show that we're going to have for you today. So Angie, you've got our word of wisdom today.
Yes, we're going to start with the word of wisdom. And today's quote that I found was from Henry Longfellow. And it's, the talent of success is nothing more than doing what you can do well. That's a very straightforward quote. And I feel that success, everyone has success. There is no failure, because as long as you try to do what you can do, you are always in a success.
Well, I think that there is, there are varying kinds of success. Mm-hmm. And the one thing you can't ever fail at is simply being you. If you are just you, then there's no failing being you. There's a failing being what your parents wanted, or failing what your spouse wanted you to be, or failing the mom or dad that your kids wanted to be, or or an employer, or an employee, whichever, you can fail at what somebody else wanted you to be, but you can never fail at being you. I do think that there are things that we try to do and we don't succeed at, but that doesn't make us a failure. And it depends on whether we learn from it. Where do we go with it? How do we move forward? The more things that we try and the more that we learn from what we have tried, even if it didn't go how we wanted it to go, I think is the closer we get to accomplishing the things that we're here to accomplish, being the things that we're here to be. It's very interesting, how on Facebook it flashes up something from, a memory today. Mm-hmm. So my memory today was a quote that I put out, and I read it, and I thought, I must have been in a hurry when I put this out, because I had to edit it a little bit. So I actually had to rewrite the quote over the quote, slightly corrected. And it said something about when we in the surrendering of what we believe to be truth, it actually allows us to be exposed to the truth Spirit has for us. Mm-hmm. And I thought of that as you're talking this one about, not failing, that you can't fail and you just want to do it and you want to do it well. And oftentimes what we are actually surrendering are the truths we have bought into that other people have of us and for us.
Correct. So when you really look at somebody that, it bothers me when I find somebody that is always looking at it as they failed. And a lot of times they're not really failing, they're just trying too hard to accomplish something that somebody else feels that they supposed to accomplish. And in honesty, the person may have put in a lot of effort. And, we don't have to succeed at everything, because part of the success of not succeeding is what we learn, what we get an ingrained feeling of within ourselves, as not as failure, but as a learning, as a lesson, so that we can improve and go higher from that point.
And it is about us applying it. A lot of times I'll talk about wisdom. And there's a difference between experience and understanding and wisdom. So we have an experience, and then after the experience, goes cattywampus or, gets all screwed up in some way, doesn't play out the way we wanted to, then we can go through an intellectual processing of, well, what went wrong? What could have been done differently? Why did the pieces go the way they did? And you can get an understanding. Then you have to look at the emotional of, well, where did my emotions kind of play into all of that? And how do I feel about it? And, what part of me, emotionally was involved in that experience? But wisdom is when you actually take that understanding, that learning, that knowledge of the experience, and you turn it into something where you actually feel, see, perceive, act differently, because you have truly integrated it into a knowing of self. And that's when it becomes wisdom. Wisdom doesn't happen because of age. There are as many old fools as there are young ones. If you don't think we don't have any old fools, you've obviously not been watching any of the political shenanigans. Because there are plenty of old fools there. So it isn't a matter of how many times you've done it. It's when do you actually integrate a difference because of it? When do you become more because of it? And that's when we're starting to talk about wisdom. One of my favorite Buddhist sayings is, to know and not to do is not to know. And I used to have that on the bottom of my stationery. And then one day I was like, I just need to replace it with one of my own quotes. I only have a couple hundred of them, right? But I really like this because how often have you heard somebody say, or I've said it, and I'm sure you said it in your life at some point, oh, I knew better.
Of course.
Oh, yeah, of course, right? I knew better. No, you didn't. Because if you did, you wouldn't have done it.
Done it.
Yeah. You intellectually understood better.
You learn how to do that. You learn from those experiences. And I think the saddest piece of that is when you do look at things as a failure, you're not going to allow yourself to have that chance to learn from that experience because you're not going to try again.
Yep.
And by not trying again, you hold yourself back from a lot of learning experience. You hold yourself back from being who you truly are.
And, this is leading into, I actually commented, there's a young man that reached out to me 3 or 4 years ago, actually, from Australia, that on my Facebook page. I'm not even ever quite sure why, but I got this feeling like I should go ahead and accept his friend request. And every now and then I've chatted with him. And he had posted something today about feeling like he was an utter failure. So I think it's interesting that this is
coming up today.
What you brought up, and that, and one of the things was, and that, that he had no future. And he's like 21 now.
Right.
But what came out in the comments was that his parents told him how his brother had a bright future and how he basically was a loser and had no future.
Yeah.
And besides the fact that it never ceases to amaze me how much stupid damage parents can do, and how many of them, if they ever had to take a test on parenting, would have flunked and never been allowed to have kids. Now, I don't know the full story on this, but what I do know is that this has been an up topic. It was an up topic on my radio show this last week, this failure topic here, and it's about where do we set up kids to fail? Where do we create failure in their mind, who they are? When do kids actually start to learn and listen? And what responsibility do parents have to the communications they have, not only to their children, but around their children? And one of the things that came out, one of the things I said was on my radio show is, whether people want to choose to believe it or not, if you tell that child in the womb that you don't want it, it hears you. It takes that in. It knows it's already been rejected. If you swear or yell at it, or you're having fights around it or about it, it knows. I hear parents go that, that a pre-verbal child, that there's no damage done if they're fighting in front of that child, in front of a 3-month-old or a 6-month-old, that they're never going to remember it. And they start feeling your ambivalence or your disdain or your anger or your frustration in the womb, whether you're the mother or the father. If that connective energy is there, you are already setting that child up for failure, even though failure doesn't exist.
No, I truly believe that, yes. I've had a partial kind of an idea of, I'm going to share something that I haven't, I'm just going to share it. Because it's just something that kind of goes along with that, but in a different sense. And so now we're going to start moving along, because now we're, I think what we're going to start getting into right now is a little bit of the failures that are surrounding us in our world. So I'm going to start by sharing, though, that when my first child was in the womb, I actually was taking classes on marketing, and they were taped classes. So I'd listen over and over and over again and get all the information, and then have to take my test. And this went on throughout my entire pregnancy. Well, today my daughter is 40 years old. However, from the time she was in her teen years, she's got the greatest marketing skills without any education piece at all. And I do believe that those were obtained through her being in the womb and going over and over repetitiously every day the marketing classes that I was taking. So it really woke me up to the fact that, yes, when your children are in your womb, they are getting feedback of what's going on in the world around them.
It's
So yes, if there's somebody that's constantly quarreling or constantly, stating the depressed piece, or, well, I'm not going to do anything. Oh no, I'm pregnant now. I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. All that yuck. That child will pick some of that up and keep that intention with them throughout their life, unless they look back at it and clear it out.
Well, and do the work they need to do the healing around it, that there's healing that needs to be done, that some part of them has been negatively impacted. And healing just means to make whole. Mm-hmm. So the process of healing means that we are giving back to them that which was indented or taken from them because of that womb experience. Now, on the other hand, I have to throw this out because there's 2 or 3 different things. One, because I always look at nature versus nurture, and some of it's nature and some of it's nurture. Because I'm afraid there's going to be some woman out there, or even man, who, they're in the early stages of pregnancy and they decide, well, I want my son or daughter to be a doctor, so I'm going to start playing Marcus Welby MD or Chicago Hope, or we're going to watch all doctor shows, or I'm going to get lectures from doctor, and I'm going to put headphones, while they're in the womb, so they'll come out and be a doctor. I think that the ground has to be fertile to grow the seeds that are placed there. And I wonder that I also am going to push this envelope for some people. Maybe your daughter, knowing that she came in to be a marketing person, that the way that she was going to gift the world was to have the skill set that was going to help get out certain messages or doing certain things, that maybe your soul and her soul agreed you were going to take the marketing classes while you were pregnant so she could get a head start.
Well, I am a strong believer of there is no such thing as coincidences. Things are already, ramped around. So yes, that could be although, it's true too, because sometimes I hear of the people, and we're laughing about this, but there are people that will put on they get those little tapes now that you can buy to actually sing to the moon, or talk about maybe poetry or whatever it may be that they're trying to inspire their child with. That's already out there in the market. I don't know if you're aware of that, but yeah, it's out there. So if you want your child to be like a great composer or something, you're supposed to play this certain types of music to get them into that composure type.
Okay, so you know what's going to happen, right? What's going to happen is somebody wants their child to grow up and be the next Mozart or Beethoven or Bach, and they play all this classical music, and they want them to maybe be a composer or a writer or a player of music, and they're going to come out and they're going to be all music jammed up for hip hop.
Yeah.
Or rap. Yeah. They're still musical.
Oh, that's Murphy's Law, of course.
Yeah, of course. But that's another interesting question and point, because you can discuss both sides of this. On one hand, we need to find out and discover who our child is as good parents, instead of trying to decide who we want the child to be and form them that way. And
Right.
One of the things is, we will bring in experiences early on that will push us towards a career or a vocation or discover a gift or a talent. We do choose our parents in a way, and in the choice of those parents, it's because there's certain things that we're here to do, or become or evolve out of. And sometimes we choose parents that will drive us in a direction to spite them. Or we drive to a direction in spite of them, that actually they're holding us back is what pushes us forward.
Yeah.
But to all of this, I still invite anybody that has young children or are going to have children or are in the process of having children. It is so important. Your child came with a personality. You do not make your child's personality. You do not mold them. They came in with certain things and you influence them, and you can help them shape what they have. But you are not the giver of their personality, and it is not your job to make them into who you want them to be. Now, you have 3 children. How different are those children?
Oh, cool. They're all different. But in my upbringing, I've always been an open book. It's like my philosophy on children is that they all have their own talents. They all have whatever they're going to be, they're going to be. And I've always been a strong believer, although some people looked at me like I was crazy, but I know from my own experience and the feelings that I've seen other things go on, you can give your child that, maybe the moral, ethical pieces of say excuse me, say have gratitude, the basic pieces. But some children you can say that till you're blue in the face and they're still not going to carry through. Others you can say it only once and all of a sudden they're like, it's their personality. They are what they are. However, my philosophy inside of myself, deep within, is that whatever you're going to bring to that child's knowledge is by the time they're 12. And then after that, they're pretty much going to start making their own decisions, their own paths, even though a lot will say, oh my goodness, no, you can't just let a child that's 12 figure out what they're doing. Well, yes, you can, because they're going to learn through those experiences. You can be there to to guide it, but allow them to take those steps so that they can grow and find out who they truly are.
Well, and you know, there's a lot of, I've had an issue for a while with the whole concept of, you know, that children couldn't fall on their face, make mistakes, that they were, you know, that they're so overprotected, and
Yeah.
everybody is, you know, and every child is you know, quote unquote special. And yes, every child is special, but there are some children who are better spellers, and they need to be recognized as better spellers. And some people are better, you know, in math, and they need to be recognized. And it should never be to make any other child feel bad, but it also recognizes the fact that some children are working harder, and some children are making more effort. And the child that isn't making more effort, or isn't working as hard, or the adult that's not making, you know, as much effort, shouldn't be rewarded equally, because everyone has to be the same. And I think that teaching children action and consequences, this is what I teach all my parents in my private practice. As soon, at a very young age, you can teach a child action and consequences, you know, and as they start to understand that their actions lead to consequences, and in that consequences, you can start to decide ahead of time, do I want the consequence that's attached with that action? If I don't, then I'm not going to take the action. I don't believe in going into the punishment model, or that you're a bad child. It's, look, here was your action, here was the consequence. We talked about it, you knew it, there it is. One of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is to watch parents that cannot keep their emotions in check when they're correcting the child. You should never correct a child from a place of high emotions, because that's when a child takes it in. It's about them. It's not about their action. It's about them, and that somehow them being loved, or them being kept in the tribe, or them being accepted is at risk. Where if it's just very black and white, it's just, here was the action, here was the consequences.
Yeah.
You chose the action, you chose the consequence. And as children start to learn this, sometimes, and adults do it all the time. Adults all the time will make a bad decision knowing what the consequence is. You know, I'm gonna, you know, I'm going to have X number of drinks, and when I do, I know I'm going to have a hangover, but it doesn't stop me from having X number of drinks. And, you know, whatever it is. So, but the younger we can install that in children, instead of, oh, you know, poor you, you know, I feel bad that you have a bellyache. Well, no, well, you did eat 3 packages of cookies and, you know, drank a quart of soda.
The way it is now.
Yeah, it's the way it is. Let's be honest. Let's teach them how the world works.
But see, some would concept that as saying that, okay, so I know my child is going to have a bad stomachache if it eats those 10 cookies. So I'm going to limit it to the 3 cookies, and that way I'll take care of the fact of it ever experiencing having those 10 cookies and feeling lousy. Well, the thing is that unfortunately, my feeling to that is you're keeping them away from feeling that consequence. You're not allowing them to experience that. And so therefore, what happens is there comes a time when they're even older and should be able to handle things like that. And now they're not going to, because they're not going to have you sitting there and saying, well, no, there's your 3. Or, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, people, I feel, in all of our piece, that each individual has to have their own consequence. They have to have the allowance to do that, to experience that, because that's, again, what brings you into that higher wisdom of, oh yeah, I remember that, I experienced that, now I'm going to be all set.
You know, one of the things is, and again, and I'm going to put this out here, I we kind of we had a guest that was going to be coming today. Something happened, the guest couldn't come. We've gone forward with the taping for the show because that's our kind of action and consequences.
Yeah.
And so we didn't discuss this was going to become a show on parenting per se, but I know, Angie has worked with people, and I've worked with families for 26 years, ADD, ADHD, regular families, whatever.
Bipolar.
So as we are sharing with you, some of what we have done in our practice or in our personal lives or whatever, there's reasons behind what we're saying, I guess is the point. And I want to make that clear to the audience because for some of our viewers, we're still new. We're still, they're still figuring out who we are.
and what
and
we do.
we're constantly expanding. We're bringing in new viewers every week.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to put that out before I said this. Part of it to me, and this is what I explain to parents when I work with them is, if you let them fall down and scrape a knee, they listen a little better next time. And then if they fall down and scrape an elbow, they listen even a little better. Maybe they end up doing something and they break a leg will mend. But letting them have kinesthetic experiences, as long as their life is not at risk, as long as it's not something that is going to negatively impact them the rest of their life. I mean, I'm not saying tell your kid, go out and break a leg. Not unless they're in theater, and then you would say, go out and break a leg before they went on stage, but that's a different kind of leg break. But from this standpoint, you do want to encourage your children, and you want to warn them, and you want to teach them about the action and consequences, and sometimes that consequence is, yes, you run and you fell down, you hit your head. This is why I told you not to run. They may run 3 more times and fall down and hit their head, but you tell them, this is what I'm doing. And like you said with the cookies, sometimes you have to let them eat 10 cookies and get sick and say, this is why I told you not to do it. Because we are experiential beings. We have to experience it. And any parent that out there that looks at me and says, well, I did everything exactly as my parents ever said, and I listened to everyone, I know they're lying through their teeth. Nobody does that. None of us did that as kids. We all pushed the envelopes. We all did things behind our parents' backs. We all bent her. I mean, I've bent
Part of the experience.
Yeah, it's part of the experience. It's part of childhood. It's part of living. And I think that we cheat children today from having a childhood oftentimes.
Oh, don't go there. It's actually, children outgrow their childhood way too quick nowadays. And I feel like I'm the old person talking about this. But at the same time, think about it. I know.
You are the old person talking about this. What do you mean?
But seriously, when you really give some thought to this, it hasn't really been the parents, though. I think it's been more of society and itself in general. Because there's been so many stipulations starting to be put onto a lot of things. And there's so much fear factor out there in our universe. It's not just, it's universal now. It's like everywhere. Unfortunately, there's a big fear factor of, yes, I have my child, and my child, I now have to keep them in my little bordered area because you never know what's going to go on next. You don't know if there's going to be a shooting down the street. You don't know if somebody's going to kidnap them off the side of the road. You know, there's so many different things that are going on, or somebody's going to knock them off of the road because they're going to be in road rage. But unfortunately, this isn't helping our children because they're not having that opportunity to go out there and play, get away from all the electronics. Electronics are good, don't get me wrong. I've seen many children aspire from actually working with some electronics and learning. It's great to see that they have such great knowledge. But knowledge isn't everything, and the experience of being out in nature, the experience of having to make some decisions between their friends, it's lacking right now.
Yeah, I
And
think
it's not something that we should be proud of. as a country, as a nation, as a universe, because our children are lacking that ability to have that piece of life.
You know, there was several years ago, you know, there was the Baby Einsteins,
Yeah.
the whole series.
Yeah.
And then they ended up being all sorts of lawsuits because it was supposed to be increasing the child's IQ, blah, blah, blah. And it actually decreased it because kids learn kinesthetically. They need to touch, hold, figure out. They just can't have it thrown at them at a screen and get it. And yes, we have a different world than we had 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And we're going to have a different world in
It's
10
gonna be
years.
changing in another 10, yeah.
Yep. And so there's an evolution, but there is always balance. There's always some kind of balance. And, you know, and it used to be, when I was a kid, sometimes it wouldn't even be TV. It would be, you know, you're reading so much, go out and play. You need to go out and play, get out of the house, have some exercise. And so I think that there needs to be more awareness of, is my child having a balanced set of experiences? And of course, if you're role modeling a completely unbalanced life, well, what are they going to learn? How to have an unbalanced life, because that's what you're role modeling to them. You know, I always say you will teach your children, whether you mean to or not, you know, your children will learn from you as parents until 3 days after you're dead. And I always say it's 3 days after you're dead, because that's about how long it takes for them to figure out what kind of mess you left them in your estate. And they're still learning from you from that, right? How did you die? Did you die with grace? If you said that you thought you were going to die and go to heaven, and then at the end of it, you're like, no, I don't want to go. Well, you don't believe in heaven much, do you? Because there should be, I'm coming, my time is over, God is calling me home. If that's what you believe, why are you in crisis? Really? I mean, I've always been like, excuse me? Some of the most seriously religious people I know that, you know, like thump and thump and thump on this little black book. We won't mention any names. And, you know, and my reward is in the kingdom of heaven. And then they're dying and they're like, I don't want to die. I'm like, well, why not? Heaven's waiting for you. But our children, even when they become adults, look to us and say, how did you live? How did you die? How did you deal with it? Did you go peaceful? You know, my father, who was a very non-religious man, no way, shape, or form. But he was very much at peace. I mean, I watched him at the end when he died, and he said, we actually we had a do not resuscitate, a DNR. And the doctor was trying to talk him out of having a DNR. And this was at a VA hospital. And so what happened was you know, he was going in for a surgery and stuff like this. And we knew because of his age and his health issues that he could likely die on the table. And if he died and they brought him back, he would have that percentage-wise, he would have a very compromised life. He would not have his independence. He would not have this stuff. And the doctor came in and said to my father, I understand you have a DNR. And he goes, and the funny thing is, she came in and he was already starting to be drugged for his surgery. And so he was already a little like, just lightly confused. And I had his medical power of attorney, and he looked at me and he said, you know, what's she talking about? And I said, Papa, I said, if you die, what do you want to have happen? Do you want them to bring you back? And he goes, if I die, I'm meant to be dead. And I'll be with my mother and my sister and whatever. And he was like, and I said, well, and she's like, I don't think you understand. And I said, well, I think he understands pretty good. If he dies, he's meant to be dead. Leave him dead. That's what I think. And I always remember this because it was a female doctor, young female doctor, looked at my father and she said, "All I can say, Mr. Emery, is you must be leaving a very large estate for your son." To which I responded, we were on the 17th floor. To which I responded, if you don't go out the door, you're going out the window. And she left. But Papa taught me not to be afraid to die. And you teach your children stuff every day. How do you deal with stress? How do you deal with boss? How do you deal with frustration? How do you deal with truth, with honesty? Mm-hmm. Are you proclaiming one religious belief system, but living totally opposite? Are you teaching your children to be a hypocrite? Say the right thing and do the wrong thing. And can you yell at them if they do it, if they're watching you do it every day? You know, I don't think a lot of times parents understand how closely, even if you don't think so, that child is watching you.
Oh no, child watching. And I have an example of how closely your child watches you. My two children at the time, one was 4 and the other one was 6. And I didn't even notice it. That was when I started to have an issue with my knee, because I took my knee out. This is like way back. And so for 2 years, I actually one-stepped on the stairwell. Wherever I went, it was a one-step. Because the knee was all messed up. And one day I looked and realized that both my children at that time, the younger ones that I had, when they were going up and downstairs, even when we went to drop them off at school,
they were one-stepping.
They were one-stepping. And I was like, okay, we better fix that.
Yeah.
But that's how closely your children pay attention. I mean, that.
Yep. Well, and, you know, I always think of, you know that I teach a class called Everything You Need to Know About Life You Can Learn from a Broadway Musical. And one of the songs that I will highlight is Children Must Carefully Be Taught. Children Will Listen. So that's two different ones. Children will listen, and you must be carefully be taught. One's from South Pacific and one's from Into the Woods. Mm-hmm. But it talks about how we teach hate to our children. We teach judgment to our children, and that they must be carefully taught to hate the people that their parents hate. Mm-hmm. Kids don't come in hating. Kids don't come in judgmental. No. Kids don't come in closed-minded. Now, again, now I'm going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. They do come in with a personality. There are some children that are naturally a little more cautious, and that is part of their personality. There are some that are a little bit more adventurous, but they don't come in hating. They don't come in judging. And, so on one hand, and I think it's fascinating, you have South Pacific going, you must be carefully taught to hate before you're 7 or 8, and then you have be careful, children will listen. They listen to what you do, mm-hmm. not what you say. But children will listen. And I see some of the role modeling that children are constantly getting from the adults that they're told they're supposed to be looking up to, the adults that they're supposed to trust, the adults that are supposed to keep them safe. And, last week, we had Sheila Duncan on, mm-hmm. and Trouble the dog. Who,
yes.
And she talked about how one of the reasons she created this dog is because there was so much bullying and so much violence and so much abuse that our children face. And, it does. It destroys the childhood. It makes you not allowed to be children.
Right. But in part of that, too, a lot of our society pieces they have children already planning out what are you going to be doing for college when they're like in they're not even into their junior high years sometimes, and they're already starting to get them to evolve into something that they really shouldn't be evolving into for probably 6, 8 years later. But that's the way we're evolving. So it's almost like, what do you do with that? Because then, especially right now, the way things are evolving, children, and these are adults actually now, the adults who have been told this is what you specifically had to do or this is what you should be doing, they're sitting there and lost and confused because they've decided to follow that path. And now they're sitting there going, what am I going to do with this now? Where does it go to? What can I, and a lot of them are starting to feel, because now they're into their adulthood and they're really kind of monitoring themselves, are starting to realize, I really don't care to do that, or I really don't care to be in that field, or I really don't want to live this way.
Yep.
And they're they're in chaos. They're like, well, what do I do now? And of course, here we go. We brought in that feeling of failure to a whole outreach of our younger generation.
And, I mean, I went to college, obviously kept going to college and, and kept getting degrees and stuff like this. But college is not the be all and end all. No. I've worked with many. In fact, I recently did a series on my radio show of very impressive 20-somethings that were already successful in business, that were self-made millionaires. Yeah. I remember years ago being flown to England for 6 weeks to work with a bunch of self-made millionaires. Yeah. Some never graduated what we would call high school. They didn't, they didn't go to college. They found their passion. And in the case of England, they all shared that they were my kids. They were ADD, ADHD, but some of the kids some of the young people, men and women. In fact, I'm trying to get one of them because they're close enough that they actually could come up to be on our TV show. And I'm trying to figure out, because she is in college now, but she started what she started before she went to college. And so when you really inspire and motivate your child to find their passion and what their natural gifts and talents are, don't judge those. I was talking to somebody the other day who now is thinking of going to school in their mid-20s because they really wanted to become a writer, but in high school, all they got was discouragement of, you can't make a living as a writer. Well, there's an awful lot of writers out there that would disagree with you. Okay? And so they did something practical. They did what they were supposed to do. And it didn't work, and it was a miserable failure. And so now they're starting over in the mid-20s to try to follow something that they want to do. And so you find, that's when I say, you need to meet your child. Who is your child?
See, some people might argue with you that that was something from before, but now you can't accomplish that. Because right now the whole thing is you can't get anywhere unless you have a college education. I disagree with that. Even in this time frame, there are, like you said, people now that I know who haven't gone to college or did go to college for something, and now they're doing something completely different, but it's their passion, like you said, and they're doing excelling well. And honestly, some of the parents are a little upset, like, what do you mean you're going to do that? You're not going to do this. But you see this child, which is now an adult, excelling at what it was that they should have really been doing to begin with.
Well, and there are certain things you have to go to college for.
Yes, there are.
You have to go to college to be an MD. You have to go to college to become a lawyer. You have to go to college. There are certain things you have to go to college for to do it in a traditional way. And if that's the way you choose, yes, you have to go to college. But there's all sorts of things that you can do, especially if you're dealing in the creative arts. if you're dealing in any kind of the form of the creative arts, if you're an inventor, if you're a writer, if you're a singer, if you're a dancer, you know, whatever, college may or may not help. It's going to be real life experience. I mean, I always laugh. It took 10 years for me to get my bachelor's. It took 10 years to get my bachelor's, and you know, I got a bachelor's in
10 years.
10 years. It took me from 17 to 27 to get a bachelor's, you know, business psychology. And the reason was that I got offered, because I was business management, and I got offered my first supervisory job when I was 18. I was managing by 19. I spent the majority of those 10 years in management roles, though I had no degree in management yet.
Right.
And by the time I was taking my last classes to get the degree, just to say I got it, because I was so close, I got in trouble with one of my professors because he was presenting something. And I said, well, that's great in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. And he got all huffy with me. And I said to him, I said, how many people have you ever managed? I've managed a management staff at that point. I'd managed a management staff of like 10, 12 people and 110 employees.
Yeah.
And said, that doesn't go in this industry. And he'd never really managed ever anybody. He was just book smart.
Yeah.
And he actually took it out on my grade. He told me he took it out on my grade. You
But
know?
that goes on today even. So.
Yeah. But so.
But yeah, it's just something, you know, people have to really start to look at our generation that's coming up and giving them the pat on the back and reminding them that they do have to be successful in their own way, not in the way that people want to mold them. And with that, I think I'm going to start to do the wrap up. It's been fun to sit here and have a small discussion for a change of pace.
For a change of pace. You know, one of the things I do want to say is I want to say that, you know, this is show 12 for us, I believe, 12 or 13.
I do
13.
believe it's 13. Yeah.
13. You think I keep the spreadsheets, I would know, right? So Sheila was 12. So episode 13. I do want to welcome, and I have before, but I want to welcome again. I know that we've picked up Concord, and we've picked up Nashua, who are showing our shows. We have picked up a regional channel in Vermont. I still have not got exactly the name that I was told that it would come to me at some point, but it hasn't come to me yet. So I know that there's a place in Vermont. Now, we also are available on something called Teleview, and that's out of New Jersey. And so, which means that basically any public access channel in the country that belongs to Teleview can pick us up and be showing us on their local public access. Because we put this through a lot of social media, we don't know all of who you guys are out there that may be watching us. And oftentimes we talk about community, but we try to remind you everything that's going on in our community, you have a version of it going on in your community. There are nonprofits in your community. There are artists, there are healers, there are people that are bringing light into the world in your community. Yeah. But one of the things Angie and I would like to ask you to do is, if you are watching us on a public access channel and it's not one of the ones we have mentioned, if perhaps somebody in your area has discovered our show, please send an email to Angie@weboflight.com or Dr. Kevin, DrKevin, @weboflight.com. We'd like to welcome you to our audience and say a big hey to you from here, from Hudson, New Hampshire, where we do our filming. So also, if you feel like you have a guest, if you're in this area or you know somebody that travels into this area, or we can do guests via Skype or some format, that you think really deserves the exposure that we're giving to people that come on our show, again, send us an email. So speaking of closing thoughts.
Yeah. Closing thoughts, we're just, we're getting more excited. We're going to have more people coming on. primarily about our expo. Our Web of Light Expo is coming up in April 22nd, 23rd of 2017. But pretty soon you're going to start to see some of the presenters that are going to be there. They'll be coming on to our show. And all of this is bringing community together and getting people to understand all the options and all of the pieces that are fitting into their puzzle of now.
Angie, I honestly don't remember, and you may not either, but when we did the shows where we interviewed each other, did I ever tell you where the Web of Light name came from? I don't think I did.
I don't think we brought that up. But
Yeah. So I originally got the Web of Light name back in the early 90s when I had a very strong message that I had a spiritual practice in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I was in my office. I was looking at the only door into my office. We were on the second floor. There was no other way to get into it. And I heard a voice very clearly say, "Sell everything and go on the road." At that point, I was doing what everybody told me I couldn't do. Everybody said that nobody made a living off being a full-time spiritual practitioner. This was, again, the early 90s. I mean, unless maybe you were a massage therapist, maybe an acupuncture, but not a medical intuitive, not a psychic, not a spiritual coach and counselor, not the kind of the more abstract spiritual things that people at Reiki, people weren't making full-time livings doing that in the early 90s. But I was told to do that, and I did it, and I was making a good living, and I was enjoying my practice and enjoying my life. But I got this message that said, "Sell everything and go on the road." And within 6 months, I had sold everything, and I went on the road and was on the road for 2.5 years full-time. Well, one of the images I got when I got that message from Spirit to sell everything and go on the road, to basically close down my practice, move some of them to phone that wanted to continue to work with me, was that I was being put on the road to weave a web of light. And this is, internet was just pretty new.
Yeah.
And the fact that I got a website called weboflight.com in the I think 92, 93 was when I got it. It was pretty early in the day. But it was just this image of weaving that web of light and connecting people that were bringing light into the world that were surrounded by darkness, surrounded by ignorance, surrounded by bigotry, surrounded by judgment. And when we decided to do this TV show, it really pleased me that you resonated to that name and to bring that name back. And part of what we are here to do is to weave a web of light, to bring people who are bringing light into the world, to bring them together, to offer them out, and to let people know that every one of us has the ability to weave one of those threads of light. So I just wanted to share that because I don't think I ever shared exactly where Web of Light came from.
It's a good thing to share, though. And you haven't shared that it's also, hopefully you'll get it up and going again, but it's also a nonprofit which helps people to weave that light.
Yep, Web of Light Foundation. The Web of Light Foundation is still, it's slowly growing and evolving out. But we chose, the Web of Light Foundation, also known as WOLF.
Yeah.
But, is something that we'll see come more into its power to create leaders of the pack. And one of the reasons that was a name for it, a tagline for it, creating leaders of the pack, was it wanted to offer people the kind of help that they needed, not necessarily the kind that society wanted to give them to become all that they were here to be. So any last, what's coming up? We got an expo on
on the 17th up in Hampton, which is the smaller expo, Hampton, New Hampshire, at the American Legion on High Street, 69 High Street. And then we'll also be going on the 18th of September. You can see both of us over at the Loving Life Expo, which is going to be held at the Executive Court in Manchester, New Hampshire, 1199 South Mammoth Road. Great day. You're going to be a guest speaker. I'll be doing a guest speaking. We have other presenters that'll be there. Next session that we come on, I'll give you a few listings of people that will be there.
Great.
It's going to be a great day.
Absolutely. So as we close this episode of Web of Light, we hope that you enjoyed it. Every now and then, Angie and I are going to do this again. We're just going to discuss some of what's going on in the world. But what I want you to remember from today's show is our children are our future. Our children are not just the children we give birth to, they're all the children of the world. All of the children of the world are out there, and they're all our children. So be aware of what you're role modeling to them, what you're teaching them, what you're showing them, and how you treat them. Namaste.